Good morning. We are in a pretty extraordinary time, I think, in the IT industry. I've had the fortune of being in the IT sector for the past 26 years, if you can believe that. And I've seen, as many of you have as IT executives, a significant change of strategies, technologies, innovations, and how they're impacting the world, and how IT organizations, collaborating with our business partners, are implementing things that, quite frankly, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought even possible. So it truly is an extraordinary time. I probably have my father to thank, who, back when I was a freshman in college, talked me into taking a computer science class, and I immediately changed over from engineering to computer science, and it's all she wrote. But it is an exciting time. I think today we've got some significant game changers that are impacting our space and how we deliver technology to our constituents, our internal customers, our customers on the outside, et cetera. And those game changers are cloud computing, social media, and I consider the analytical side of social media a significant opportunity and a component of social media, mobile computing, business intelligence, and having that shift move into the cloud versus being controlled in the corporate data center. Security, and I include data loss prevention. I truly believe that with the tremendous push into the cloud and the acceleration into the cloud, we're going to, as CIOs, almost become CISOs and bond with the CISOs into thinking very differently about how we secure the information in our organizations as a result of cloud computing, social media, the consumerization of IT. And we'll talk a little bit about bring your own devices to work and consumerization of IT later on today in a panel. Just some significant trends that are just changing the game in how we deliver services. And finally, virtualization and VDI at the desktop layer. I think there's going to be an interesting challenge in the next 6 to 12 months between new desktop operating systems such as Windows 8 and the virtualization market at the client side, and where that intersects, and quite frankly, which one wins. Virtualization at the server side is mature. It varies globally with regards to how mature organizations are with regards to virtualization. It does vary significantly globally, but I do find that virtualization is one of the key components that is helping to drive the cloud computing phenomena, which 2 years ago was more hype. Today it is absolute reality. Make sure I'm getting there we go. I have to be a little closer to the computer, so I'll just flip to this side. So I want to talk a little bit about following the money. When we look at the trends that are driving and impacting our world as IT executives, I have to reflect on the fact that the media is a consideration for why some of these trends are driving, cloud computing, et cetera. IT advisories are contributing to the trends themselves. Many of the CIOs that I spoke to when I was researching my most recent book, CIO Leadership in a Mobile, Social, and Cloud-Based World, explained to me that they were kind of going kicking and screaming into certain components of the cloud. And their number one reason was security. But that said, the dollars of the IT advisories support and tell us where the investments are happening and support these game changers that are taking place in our industry. If you look at collaboration, up at 35% increases, enterprise applications, 34 to 35%, cloud and software as a service, 25% increases. We're talking about significant increases in spending when the average spending increases, say in North America, are going to be around 7%, globally 5.1%, but you're seeing, in some cases, 5 times spending increases by CIOs and organizations today in areas that are attributed towards cloud, social and cloud, mobile and cloud, and the derivatives that support that, which include virtualization and security. So it's just very fascinating to me that this is no longer hype. We are in this, and we are in this heavy right now, and I think it's actually a very good thing, because there's a lot of really cool benefits of cloud computing. Some risks, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those today as well. Some of the market trends are just phenomenal. When you look at the global private cloud market, $7.8 billion in 2011, and it's projected to reach almost $16 billion by 2015. These are staggering investment numbers, and more importantly, staggering increases in the jump from fiscal year to year. The software as a service market, a portion of cloud obviously, represents the largest portion of the global cloud market, $21 billion in 2011. And you look at some of the underlying drivers that are pushing things into the cloud. 29 billion mobile applications were downloaded in 2011, and that's up from 9 billion the last prior year. 1 billion consumers will have smartphones. Think about where we were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and the percentage of mobile devices that I'd call dumb versus smart. Fast forward to today, and the significant increase in mobile computing as a result of SaaS, as a result of cloud, as a result of social media. It's just, the numbers are mind-boggling. 22 billion SMS messages sent per day in 2011. Those numbers are going to double. SMS, by the way, is the single largest software application that is used in the world, which is an interesting lowest common denominator, but it's still a component of this tremendous trend of mobile to social to cloud as the underlying drivers. So my point is, there are several of these game changers that are so interleaved, that are pushing us, driving us, and interrelated into cloud technologies. You can't just look at it as individual verticals. We as CIOs have to take the whole portfolio and work very closely with the constituents in our organization to make sure that we're parsing them correctly and getting the best investment for our organization to meet the highest level of business needs that we can, that tie into our chief marketing officers on the sales side, the revenue side, the CEO's strategies and goals for the organizations, et cetera. When I look at other IT advisory research, there's a significant increase in the likelihood of a project that's going to involve cloud computing. Forrester, I actually can't see that far over there. When you look at, can I ask for the monitor to actually have this presentation as well by chance while I'm presenting? Is that possible? Anyway, I'll keep going. So the top two priorities that are happening in IT operation and infrastructure are involving in some form cloud computing. So these are on our agendas, and if they're not, they're going to be on your agenda the next year. I've been reading some of the underlying presentations that have been discussed previously and that are going to be discussed as well, and some of the data and the statistics of not only what we're spending money on, but what our priorities are going to be in the near future are pretty impressive, but staggering. I find it fascinating as well, though, that when we look at some of the trends, nothing is free. I do think that CIOs that are involved in cloud computing will be in this space for some time. But I also think that there are certain disruptive components that are both exciting but introduce risks. So let me talk about some of the benefits of cloud computing, and then I'll go into some of the risks and challenges associated. First and foremost, faster provisioning of servers, disks, and applications. You're all aware of the platform as a service, the infrastructure as a service, the software as a service, the components of private cloud, public cloud, hybrid clouds, et cetera. And you're going to decide where you're going to play in those spaces, whether you're going to be more in the software as a service side and do it for certain areas of your organization, certain components of the data or the business, and whether or not you're going to keep other components internal behind your firewall in your data centers. But the reality is, we know how long it takes to provision internally, and cloud computing allows us, especially on the infrastructure as a service side, to deliver services much, much more quickly and timely and save us money. Cost savings. One of the elastic elements of not only performance, but of pay for what you use is a very significant incentive from my perspective as a CIO when I look at what am I going to push into the cloud versus what am I going to keep in our corporate data centers. And paying for what you use is significant. When you go out and buy a truckload of disks, terabytes after terabytes, and you invest in it, you spin up a number of projects. I'll give you an example as to one of the reasons why it's attractive on the elastic side and on the cost side in paying what you're using and then when you drop it off. We were just recently involved about the last 12 months of a major financial application that was in private cloud. We spun up about 10 environments to support that during the pre-production environment, which had a significant amount of disk and a significant amount of servers. Now, if we'd invested in that upfront, capitalized it, and then spun them down to our 3 environments that we needed post-production, we'd have all this investment likely sitting idle, and from a utilization standpoint, be much, much lower on what we really want to get from our investment. But on the cloud side, we can spin up environments, we can spin up disk, we can have high-performing CPU and high-performing memory environments, and when we no longer need them, we shut them down. So literally, we're moving to an environment, especially attractive in the non-production world as you move into the prod side, where you can turn services up, turn them down, and pay for what you use at an hourly level. I'll talk a little bit about some of the costs associated with these offerings on the cloud, and it's very attractive. Ease of deployment of major applications. How many of you, just by a raise of hands, have deployed either an HR, a manufacturing, a CRM, or a financial application in the cloud in the last 12 months? How many of you are planning to do that in the next 12? As a CIO who's gone through many, many ERP implementations, I know how long it takes to turn up a project where you're installing software, installing the patches, getting all your infrastructure scaled right, all your non-production environments, your production environments, et cetera, and all in advance of go live. In the SaaS market, these can be turned on instantaneously, and that is extremely attractive. One of the things that I want to highlight is that when I talked about follow the money, the investment of the dollars, significant investments in these types of strategies and trends, much more higher than the classic growth of IT spending globally. There's an interesting phenomena that's about to happen to your budgets in the next 8 years, and that is by 2020, more than 50% of technology spending will not be sitting in your cost center, in your budget. It won't be there. It'll be in the business budget. And the reason for it is because IT, in many instances, is no longer that barrier required to turn up an application or turn up an infrastructure or turn up storage. It's on demand, on accessible, and in the cloud. Where we are going to come into play is on the integration side and on the data security side. So what's fascinating to me is that while we as IT executives are managing these trends today, we're managing the adoption of some of these technologies in the cloud, but I don't think we fully realize we're about to lose control of half of our budgets in 8 short years. And that's because, like I said, a business unit, a CMO that has plenty of money doesn't necessarily require IT to turn up something in the cloud unless they want to integrate it with something else in the organization. These are some of the derivatives of the trends of cloud computing. Performance, monitoring, uptime, etc. I spend a lot of time as the CIO for the Pew Trust making sure that our systems are performing during business hours, that we have appropriate windows for maintenance. I spend a tremendous amount of time on service level agreements, system uptime, performance monitoring and management. And on the applications that are moving into the cloud, that goes away. It's not that I'm not paying attention to it, it's now contractually obligated. I spend more time on the front side negotiating the contracts to make sure that the availability and the monitoring and the performance and the contractual ability to turn up more performance is baked into those agreements, but less time physically monitoring those applications and systems as part of my data center, or centers, actually. So the dynamics are changing. The trends are requiring us to focus and think differently. Now, that said, what I think the future of cloud computing is not going to be a purist private cloud, a purist public cloud model. I absolutely am convinced that it will be a hybrid environment where organizations will have certain things that they don't want to push in the cloud, in their own data centers, and when they do push into the cloud, it's going to be a combination of public and private. With that, your monitoring and your performance is spread across a variety of vendors. There's no holy grail on this one where we're going to go and contract with a single vendor for all of our applications, SaaS, infrastructure, platform on a service, et cetera, and have them all under one vendor management and roof. It's not happening. So you are seeing a decentralization of vendor management, and you're seeing a decentralization of performance monitoring and uptime. And some organizations, quite frankly, you cannot move the needle on that system uptime percentage that they're going to guarantee. I don't want to name vendors per se, but one vendor that is a large CRM vendor that I've worked with and contracted with actually would not go above 98% guaranteed system uptime. Wouldn't do it. Now in our world, 98% on the inside of a data center is horrible. I want 99.5 at a minimum. So you do lose some control, and I'm starting to delve a little bit into some of the challenges with it, but the reality is you're decentralizing your vendor management and your performance monitoring and management as well. Disk can be cheaper in the cloud depending upon how you use it. Let me go back to my example of talking about non-production environments as part of a big ERP implementation. We had almost 10 environments during the implementation phase. All that disk space, all that virtualized server infrastructure goes away, or a fair portion of it goes away, after we move into production. Then we maintain our typical change control environment and our limited non-production environments, again in the cloud, in this case private cloud, but we saved money because we didn't invest a truckload of money on the disk space that was required to turn this thing up and grow the data. We invested in the turn-up of those systems and disks. And then when we no longer needed them, we turned them away. So the elastic capabilities and the pay-as-you-use, including performance and disk and infrastructure, is extremely attractive and can lower your costs in the cloud, specifically on the disk side. When you get a chance, take a look at some of the details that are provided in this example of looking at a capital purchase of a large SAN environment versus a cloud-based implementation of that. The numbers are interesting, but I will note that there is an impact not only on the IT budget, as more of our budgets are going to be operating versus capital. Depending upon the size of the organization, the impacts could affect net income. And the reason being is, if you're in the cloud, you're likely using operating dollars and not capitalizing these large purchases anymore. And the impact of that is you're no longer depreciating those investments over 3 years or 5 years, depending upon what your organization's policies are. You're hitting those expenses all in the current year, and as a result, having higher percentage of IT expenses in that year and lowering the attribution to net income. So there's some hidden underlying relative financial components of cloud computing as well, as we treat them from a budgetary perspective and a depreciation perspective. Patch management is outsourced. Now that said, everybody knows that when you outsource a product to a vendor or a cloud vendor or a service vendor, you still have to manage that vendor. Patch management is something that still has to be clearly managed but the vendor's performing this. The hassle goes out the door. I find tremendous improved disaster recovery capabilities with moving into the cloud for certain ERP implementations and large system services. When I came to my organization 3 years ago, we had 100% of our systems and data behind the corporate firewall in our data centers. Today, I have 90% of our Tier 1 applications in the cloud in some combination of public and private and doing integration between the two of them. It's saving me a significant headache on the disaster recovery side because I'm baking that capability, business requirement, and letting the vendors handle the DR components between their infrastructure and their data centers. So that's a tremendous benefit for me as a CIO. There's also a potential for improved security. Now, I have that as a challenge as well, but let me touch on the possibility for improved security. For cloud vendors to do things well, they're going to need to be fully baked into the SAS 70s, the SSA IEs for security standards, et cetera. And in some cases, you may get better security management because of the consistency applied at the vendor layer in order to attract the customers to be able to move their data and or systems into the cloud. That said, I do think you need to watch security, and my security focus has moved much more from less in the cloud to much more on the client and at the institutional level flowing through the networks. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. Risks and challenges. Integration. When you move into the cloud, your integration game changes overnight. Completely changes. I ripped out all of our integration technologies and strategies that we had employed at Pew previous to the cloud and completely changed it so that we have now a cloud-to-cloud, cloud-to-premise, and premise-to-premise integration ability, encryption as needed, with one tool. Security, data loss, and theft is very interesting in the cloud. You really have to pay attention to it, and you really have to make some tough decisions as to whether or not you're going to require your staff to be able to come back into your organization and VPN in securely and then hit the cloud services so you can ensure that they're not hitting these cloud-based services from maybe personal devices, home devices, where you can't have a DLP or a data loss prevention agent installed on them to really know what they're doing. And in those cases, you have to solely rely on the security and the application roles that are defined at the application level in the cloud to protect your organization's data. I think security is going to be the #1 focus for the next 3 to 5 years for CIOs and CISOs as more organizations move into that hybrid cloud market. Because at the end of the day, the more restrictive we are with regards to how our staff accesses these systems, and that's even aside from how your public and your customers access your products and services, the more restrictive we are, the better security we get, but the more restrictive we are, the more pushback we get from our customers internally, our staff. Vendor lock-in. If you're looking for the big vendors of the world, whether it's the Amazons, the Rackspaces on the pure platform as an infrastructure or infrastructure as a service side, to take that whole gamut and then have maybe vendors manage some of your larger ERP initiatives in that one space, you have vendor lock-in issues. But more likely, you're going to be dealing with a decentralized vendor scenario that is combined with infrastructure, storage vendors in the cloud, and software as a service vendors in the cloud, depending upon the products you pick. Because if you're picking a certain CRM or a financial system that only runs in the cloud in their platform, you don't have a choice. You're moving to that platform, and thus you're in a hybrid world. Non-flexible SLAs. Again, I touched base with one of the CRM vendors I worked with, and their service level agreement on system uptime was an immovable, non-negotiable number. We couldn't touch it. This diagram is an example of the shift in the marketplace from 5 years ago to where you had much more control of your IT investments and your assets, data, applications, You know, you see your trusted network on the side. You've got all your internal investments in your virtualization, your storage, your networking, your demilitarized zones, your intrusion detection, all your firewall technologies, et cetera. And then off to the right, you're seeing certain components of the business that are no longer in your control at the application or the infrastructure layer, whether it's email, financial, CRM, HR, your phone system. How many of you are contemplating pushing your phone system into the cloud? Not many. We've taken on that as a pilot project in my organization for one of our subsidiaries that is actually shrinking and being spun off. We're moving their phone system into the cloud and leveraging multiple telecommunications pipes to have many different avenues to get to that product, but essentially moving the PBX into the cloud and delivering it as a service. Really cool technologies. Integration, the game changes completely when you move into the cloud. Dell is a vendor that has a phenomenal product called Boomi to do integration. And I highly recommend that you look at Dell's product, look at some of the other products in the market, but at the end of the day, if you're doing cloud level and SaaS level computing and having the need to link back to anything in your data center or into the cloud applications that are from different vendors, you have to change the game and the technology with regards to how you're going to integrate. And like I said, I ripped out the plumbing in our organization and completely replaced it. Since we're running a little short on time, I won't go through as many of the details on these slides other than to say this is an example of a cloud to on-premise integration using the new tool technology that allows us to use web services calls, secure and encrypted integration from cloud to on-premise using either virtual server technology, on-premise, or an appliance. So there's a lot of capabilities in how you deploy this, but at the end of the day, you're going to need a new tool set and a new set of IT skills in order to be able to do this well. The CIOs that are going to do this well are going to pick the right product and use it for all your integration, on-premise to on-premise, cloud to cloud, cloud to on-premise. Some of the tools have workflow built in. So not only can you do workflow, but you can do intelligent workflow based on the data that comes out of web services calls. Very, very slick. And in this case, this is a cloud-to-cloud integration. The other one was cloud to on-premise. This one is, I've got two cloud services, two different vendors, two different SLAs, two different contracts, two different security things I need to worry about. But I have to integrate these things securely. And I can do it with the same set of technologies, and Dell Boomi is an example of something that does this very, very well. Refocusing on security is probably my number one item in addition to driving and implementing our cloud technology strategy. And the reason being is our staff is accessing stuff in the cloud from anywhere. We made a decision not to be restrictive on, they have to run it from, we're not doing IP ranging, where we're specifically tying them to come back into our infrastructure and then use that as a jumping point so that I can guarantee that they're using an asset that we're managing and deploying, that I can ensure that there's a data loss prevention software agent running on it. This is a really tricky space for us as IT professionals, and it's something that I think we're going to be wrestling with for a long time. And I will tell you, there is no holy grail. You just have to pay attention to it. My advice is really take a hard look at data loss prevention and get a better foothold on how your staff members and your employees are using the information that is no longer within the boundaries of your control in your data centers. Cloud computing is driving mobile computing. Mobile computing is driving cloud computing. We're going to discuss later this afternoon consumerization of IT and bring your own device phenomena that's happening. The reality is we're moving mobile, and mobile is driving cloud. And then you add in the social component, and That's why I have the title of my book is what it is. This is a cloud-based, social-based, mobile-based world, and if you're not playing in it, boy, I'll tell you, you're really going to be at a disadvantage from your competitors in the near future. I'll talk a little bit about just some of the costs that are tied into cloud computing. And I'm going to reference something here that I can see, because I can't see that monitor. So you've got the ability to provision certain components as you want. You might be able to spin up a server or some SAN at $8 a day. In some cases, some of the hourly rates are 28 cents per hour. That may translate to $3,000 a year for spinning up a server from a cloud vendor. Not too bad. That varies depending upon how you look at it. If you use a high-performance environment that's got a lot of CPU and a lot of memory, it may cost you a lot more, $15,000, $20,000 per year per server. If you look at the disk, it varies as well. But at least you have the flexibility to use them when you want and turn them down when you don't and not be built. And that is probably one of the most advantageous components of cloud infrastructure as a service and platform as a service offerings. You know, when I look at just the cost of things, I use an example of a CRM system where previously, in the previous model, you go out and you buy your licenses, you capitalize them, you pay your 20% annual maintenance per year, you maintain your systems internally, you upgrade them, you patch them, and everything's all good, right? Fast forward to today. You've got your CRM in the cloud, you're no longer capitalizing it, you're no longer depreciating it, and if you've got, 1,000 users, you're spending $3 million a year as an expense to keep that CRM up and running, where the vendor doing all the heavy lifting. The paradigm has shifted. The budgets have shifted. The financial equations have shifted. And you have to be careful of vendor lock-in, because like I said, if you lock into a CRM vendor and you want to change, boy, you've got a major project on your hands to move from one cloud CRM vendor to another. It's a whole new project. So what have I done? I developed a cloud strategy as part of the IT strategic plan. I implemented 90% of our Tier 1 applications in the cloud. Traditionally, it's a combination of public and private. I probably have more in the private cloud than I do in the public cloud, just to be honest. I redesigned our entire integration strategy and toolset and training. I've re-engaged on all of our new security practices. I redefined our security policies across the board, and we are now engaging in looking at data loss prevention software. And I am heavily leveraging virtualization for everything else that I've kept in control of our data centers, both primary and secondary. So what do I recommend for you all as these trends and these game changers are impacting the way we deliver products, projects, services, support? Develop your cloud strategy as part of your strategic plan, and do it in coordination and concert with the C-level executives in your organization. You've got to get full buy-in across the board. Research the leading vendors and plan your vendor management approach. You will likely end up where many CIOs end up, which is a distributed hybrid model of multiple vendors. I just don't see the holy grail out there, which means you're going to have to pay a lot more attention to your contracts, your SLAs, and your exit clauses and penalties. Interrogate those cloud vendors before you buy. Put what you want in the contract and fight like hell for your SLAs, including your system uptimes. Consult IT advisory firms, peers, and other third-party research and professionals for input on what they've done, how they've done it, what's worked, what's not worked before you buy. Do a financial ROI, especially on, if you're considering the platform as an infrastructure, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and putting a large portion of your storage in the cloud. And then you're going to have to completely relook your infrastructure and your telecommunications and your networking environments to make sure that you can handle the capacity for what you've just moved out and everybody in your organization is going to be accessing. Prepare and educate other C-level executives as part of the process. I think that's, quite frankly, probably one of the most paramount things that I can advise you on. And without a doubt, and last but not least, re-engage and redefine your security strategy on how you're going to improve the security monitoring, prevention, and potentially blocking of confidential data before it goes out the door on a data key, before it goes out the door to a personal email account, before it's put on a social media site that you're allowing your staff to use as a result of being in the social media space, before you're allowing them to run a report off your financial or your CRM systems in the cloud and write it to a file that is now taken out of the organization. And data loss prevention software is going to allow you to set up these signatures and develop thresholds that not only monitor but potentially block that confidential information from going out the door. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.